And here we are for a new educational chess game. I have white, and I'm going to play d4. My opponent plays d5, c4, the queen's gambit. Which variation will he choose? He chooses the orthodox variation by playing the pawn to e6. Knight c3, we keep up the pressure on the pawn at d5. Knight to f6, he defends. And now I take. If he recaptures with the knight, e4, and I have the center with pawn, so he recaptures with the pawn to control the square e4. And he has created a pawn structure that we call the Carlsbad pawn structure. Well, he created it, but so did I ultimately by my decision to take on d5. Now, I developed the bishop to g5, the pin of the knight on f6, and therefore the pressure on the pawn on d5. He plays knight to d7, and now he's setting a trap for me. This is called the elephant trap. Because if I take the pawn on d5, thinking that his knight on f6 is pinned, in reality, he will take my knight. And if I take his queen, he will play bishop to b4, check. And I will be forced to block with my own queen. And I will lose my queen before losing my bishop, so I will have lost a piece. So here, of course, you shouldn't fall into this trap, and I'm going to play the pawn to e3. Now, I do not have to worry about taking anymore, because if this knight takes bishop, takes queen, bishop b4, check. My king has the d2 square. I'm not forced to block with my queen on d2. So now I have the real threat of taking on d5, and he plays c6. You see, he set up this elephant trap for me. I bring out my bishop to d3. Now, he plays the bishop to e7. The queen to c2, a little pressure on the h7 pawn, even though it's true he has both knights ready to defend h7 after kingside castling. But the idea behind queen c2 isn't really to attack the h7 pawn. It's to firmly control the square e4, to prevent a knight from establishing itself on the e4 outpost. And here I'm not going to play knight f3, even though it's possible. But I'm going to play knight e2. Why? This pawn structure, the Carlsbad pawn structure, gives me an extra central pawn. But if I push e4 after various exchanges, I'll end up with an isolated d4 pawn. So the idea with knight e2 is to leave the f2 pawn free so it can go to f3 to support the e4 push. And in square of a capture, we recapture, and this time I have a duo of pawns in the center, and the f-file is semi-open for my rook if, for example, I've done kingside castling. So I'm going to play knight e2. Queenside castling is also an option. I think I once saw a game by Kasparov, the former world champion, where he did a queenside castling. But personally, I'm more used to kingside castling and playing f3 and e4. He plays h6. He's questioning my bishop. There's no way I'm giving him the bishop right away. That would just help him free up his position and speed up the completion of his development. No, I play bishop h4. I keep up the pressure. He plays rook e8, putting the rook on the semi-open file to support a knight coming to e4. A bit later, and he frees up the square f8 for the other knight, by the way. You might ask me why. To free the bishop on f5. And the knight can bounce back and sometimes even defend the square h7, which can also be useful. I'm going to kingside castling, and now, in my opinion, he's going to play knight to f8. But you see, a move like knight e4 was possible, because if I played bishop takes, queen takes, his rook and his queen with the pawn would have protected the arrival of his knight in e4. He plays knight to h5, and there he finally forces me to exchange the dark square bishops. Either I exchange it here or I come to g3, but he takes. And after recapturing with the pawn or the knight, he would have taken my dark square bishop. That bothers me a bit. I didn't want to exchange the dark square bishops. On the other hand, his knight isn't very well placed, but he can bring it back to f6 later. The check on h7 doesn't give me anything, so I'll still have to exchange these dark square bishops. Well then, since it has to be done. And now it bothers me. Why? Because he has strong pressure on the file. So if I play f3, I lose the pawn on 3. So I can also fall back on the minority attack. What is the minority attack? Well, it's basically an attack on the other side. Here I have 2 pawns against 3 pawns and even 4 pawns. You can see he has a very solid pawns chain. The minority attack consists of playing rook b1, then sending b4, b5 to weaken his pawn structure, to try to create weaknesses. Maybe I can fall back on this minority attack. Or I put my rook on e1 and I'll try to move my knight and play f3 and e4. Here I'm hesitating. Well, I think I'll try to go for the minority attack, rook b1. I'm finally changing my plans. So there are two possible plans in this structure, either the central majority attack with f3, e4, or the minority attack with b4, b5. He plays knight to f8. His knight on h5 is placed strangely, but as long as it's there, I can't play kd-g3 without allowing an exchange. So here I go with b4. If he plays b5, he might try to play b5, maybe push it to a4. But the b5 push, on the other hand, weakens the pawn on c6 along the file. Sometimes after b5, you can actually play e4 after the captures. Maybe recapturing with the bishop, attacking c6, or recapturing with the knight, which also allows the queen to attack c6. If he plays a 6, a 4 and b5 will happen anyway. So here, the idea is to try to create weaknesses in his defensive chain of pawns, create isolated pawns, weak squares. He plays queen h4. So here, he's making it very clear that he wants to attack my king, of course. But how is he going to do it? The queen here can't really be helped. She's putting pressure on h2, but then there's actually no follow-up. The bishop maybe will come to h3. I think I could even take that bishop in reality. He wants to bring the rook over maybe, but the rook won't be able to come to g6 with the bishop on the white square. Even if the knight comes to g6, it can't get closer to f4. So I don't know how he wants to build his attack with queen h4. So I'm going to play b5. I don't see any follow-up for him. I can see that the queen is getting close to my king with his knight, but there's not really any progress. So he plays bishop d7. I can hold the pose because if he takes, I can get revenge on the pawn d5. But I can take, he might recapture with the bishop. I'll take anyway. It will weaken his pawn structure a bit. If he recaptures with the bishop in any square, we can even attack the bishop with the bishop, b5, but he recaptures with the pawn. So as you can see, there's a backward pawn, a weak square. So either I take control of the square, weak knight a4, knight c5, for example, attacking his light square bishop. I'm also looking at the consequences of my rook breaking through on the 7th rank. Afterwards, his bishop is protected. He might be able to play rook b8, trying to double the rooks like that. Why not? Do I have any other interesting moves? For now, I don't see any. So I'm hesitating between knight a4 and entering on b7. Knight a4, the idea is to come to c5, take his bishop, win the c6 pawn, and then weaken d5. Knight a4, if he plays knight e6, knight c5, he'll take, queen recaptures. In this case, I think I would prefer to play rook b7. I'm going to play rook b7, a little pressure on the bishop already. It forces his knight to stay on defense. I can double the rooks. As for that move, knight a4, I can play it a bit later. He plays rook b8, as expected, so rook b1. To build up the attack against my king, maybe it will be necessary to play queen g5 and bishop h3. Mais j'ai des coupes de défense. Pour l'instant, toujours une pression sur son bishop. J'ai quoi comme coup de défense sur queen g5? Bon, il ne le joue pas. He plays knight f6 to defend his bishop, but he can still try that queen g5 and bishop h3 idea. I can even wait for him to play those two moves, and then I'll just play knight f4. I'm defending g2, and I'll even attack its bishop in h3. So there he played knight in f6. And here, however, he threatens knight g4. It's not simply about defending one's bishop, no. He's repositioning himself to come attack h2. So I'm considering a move like f5. Bishop takes, queen takes, but he still has knight g4. Which attacks f2 and h2. By the way, but queen f4 defends everything. Yes, knight g4, it's not just to attack h2, it's also to attack f2. I can play h3, but here I'm wary. Bishop takes, then we take, queen takes with the knight coming in. Maybe I can defend, but it's dangerous. I'm going to take my time here to find the best way to defend. If I attack his queen, she'll come in with knight. Maybe g4 afterwards. Well, I can push her back. g3, queen h3, knight f4. And the queen has to go back anyway. She doesn't have a lot of squares. There might be something to do against his queen. That would be pretty funny. It would be quite ironic because he's the one attacking to checkmate me. And in the end, he's the one who's going to get his queen trapped. So I'm calculating on g3, queen h3. kf4. There, I think he only has the square g4. All the other squares are controlled, so qg4, puis on h3. There, he has the square. g5 also, so g3, qh3, kf4, qg4, h3 in any square on qf3, f2, and I think he loses his queen. We must already check this variation. Okay, so here he loses. g3, queen h3, knight f4, queen g4, h3. If he comes to g5 now, h4. And now what square does he have? He only has the square g4. Bishop e2. Now he can go to f5. I am not far from catching him, but I don't catch him. Bishop e2, he plays f5, and if I return to d3, he can go back to g4, causing a repetition. It's a shame, we're not far off. Maybe we need to approach it differently then. g3, queen h3, knight f4, queen g4. Maybe I'll have to take his bishop at some point so he can't come to f5. h3, queen g5, there I take his bishop. He recaptures however he wants. h4, I attack his queen, which goes back to g4. But she will attack my rook. If I play f2 now, and if I play f5, she comes in. To f3, but I still can't catch his queen. Maybe I'll look at it a bit later. I'll still start with the move, g3. It's still a move I like. It weakens my position, but with pawns on dark squares, I keep the light squared bishop. Knight to f4 controls the light squares. And since I'm not far from catching his queen, I tell myself there might still be a little something to do. Maybe by playing a few more moves, I'll see things more clearly. So, queen g4. So he didn't go to h3, he went to g4. I thought he would go to h3 because on g4 he blocks his knight from coming in. I can't play king g2, he'll come to h3 with check. So knight f4. If I play g5, f2, he can come to f5. I can go back to d3, he comes back to g4. But I also have the h3 push. Knight f4, g5, the h3 push. Because the knight is defending. If he comes to h5, he can't, my knight is there, so he comes to f3. But here, bishop e2, I'll end up catching him. So I'm going to play knight f4 here. I'm going to play knight f4. I'm still not far from catching his queen. So here I have the moves, like h3, bishop e2, a bit less because he can come to f5. So I have to wait for him to be on f3 to play bishop e2 against him. So here the idea is to play h3 and on queen f3, bishop e2, and this time his queen is trapped. After h3, he still has g5. That's where we've been stuck for a while now, h4. Then he comes back to g4, bishop e2, he can come back to f5. If I go back to d3, that could lead to a draw. After a draw, it's not dishonorable, but actually I was playing to win this game because I think I have a better position. But it's true that I still have to deal with the pressure on my king. But let's not get carried away either. He's not going to be able to checkmate me with just 3 pieces. Well, actually, maybe he could. h3, queen g5, I take his bishop and take back. Moving the pawn to h4. If he then comes to the g4 square, f5, f2, I don't know why I said f5, his bishop is gone now, so I can just take it there. So to trap his queen on a white square, I'll have to sacrifice the rook for the bishop. Earlier, this didn't work in my analysis. I don't know what changed, but maybe now it actually works. And actually, I need to get rid of his bishop first, but he comes to g5. Okay, he comes to g5. So if I take out his bishop and he recaptures with this knight, the problem is he might recapture with the other one to create an escape route. But first I'm calculating. Rook takes, knight takes if I play h4. What square does his queen have? Only the square g4. And then bishop e2 and his queen is trapped. Now after rook takes, he'll actually take with this knight and his queen will have escape squares. So it doesn't work. My knight isn't participating, it needs to be involved, maybe with knight a4 and knight c5. There will be bishop c8. And the knight still won't help me attack. I don't know where it should be, this knight actually. All right, I'll play. Knight a4, I need to improve the placement of this knight anyway. I'm giving up on trapping his queen, I couldn't find a way. So he plays knight to h5. But now, if I play h4, what does he do? Because the knight on h5 is only held by the defense of the queen. So it has to come to g4, but it needs e2. I'm going to win the piece. I don't know why I'm racking my brain trying to trap his queen when in reality I just have to let him play and win his pieces. So I play h4. So the queen has to move, but while defending the knight, there's only the g4 square and bishop e2 now. That wins his piece afterwards. So I don't have much time left, but well, now he might resign because losing his piece is still a very hard blow for him, knowing that he won't have any attack if he loses his knight on h5. And behind that, my rook is well placed, the knight is coming to c5, the queen and the bishop are well positioned, the knight on f4 as well. He, on the other hand, has pieces that aren't playing. So he was betting everything on the attack against my king, but it's failing. So he just played queen e7. So knight takes h5. Is there any follow-up? I don't see one. Here there's a direct line between the rook and the queen. I don't see any follow-up, so I take. Now I'm going to have knight to c5 interesting to double up the attacks on the bishop that's pinned. He plays queen to d6, unpinning himself. Is he threatening anything? Always check for threats. I do not see any. I'm going to go to c5, double the pressure on the bishop, even though I know the knight is defending. He plays bishop to g4, he's attacking my knight. All right, don't I have a stronger move somewhere? I don't see one. So we'll just save the knight. Now maybe he'll push g5, he'll try to give everything to find some counterplay, but it's going to weaken his king if he plays g5 anyway. No, he plays knight to e6. Maybe I'll trap his queen with the rook to d7. But he still has some squares. So we'll just trade pieces calmly. I don't know which knight I'm going to take. I'll take this knight. He recaptures with the pawn. So now the 7th rank is open. Now I've got rook to d7, which could be very strong. What does the check on h7 give? Probably nothing. He just goes to g8. I like knight to d7 to place the knight on e5. That will help me in the fight. Knight to d7, he can't attack my rook because it's my rook that's defending the knight, but he can't attack it. So knight to d7. The knight on e5 will be very well placed. So bishop check, I said it didn't bring anything, but it could allow my queen to come into g6 to attack g7. So he puts the rook here, knight e5, I attack, the bishop, The rook attack g7, maybe f7. Check the entry of the queen in g6. And even maybe the entry of the knight in g6, that could be fun. f7 check, for example, king h8, knight g6, check. He's obliged to take, and my knight can leave while giving check. But he plays f5, he comes to hold the square g6. Well, we'll give him this check anyway. And here, if he doesn't have the bishop, I can do the royal fork with knight f7. So I'm going to play bishop g6. If bishop takes, I can take back with the knight and give check. I can also take back with the queen, threatening queen g7 mate and the fork on f7. I can even take back with the knight. I really don't know which is best, but with the queen, it just feels so natural. We're threatening mate, we're threatening the royal fork. He comes to f8. And now I'll have knight f7 check, king g8, knight takes h6 check, since the pawn on g7 is pinned. His rook is also under attack, but I can take it later. I can repeat the moves, I can do that. Knight d6, check, and then come back to f7 to take his rook, and then mate him on g7 afterwards. But well, king g8, knight takes rook, that's already very decent. If he takes back, it's mate right away. Well, he resigned. So we see that the chess.com computer gives me 96% accuracy versus 84%. We see that in the opening there are exclamation marks, which means that we played with 100% accuracy in the opening. On the other hand, in the middle game, I continued to have good accuracy. Here I have 94.6% in the middle game, and my opponent dropped to 80%. So it was in the middle game that he cracked. But we saw that. Now let's take a look at this game with the analysis. On the left, you have the analysis section, the evaluation bar. So d4, d5 was played. c4, he plays e6. Knight c3, knight f6, that's normal. Here, I take on d5. This is what's called the Carlsbad structure. It's the structure we're going to play. I play bishop g5, he plays the elephant trap on me with knight d7. So here, you absolutely must not take on d5 as I explained to you during the game, because he takes the knight, and when I take his queen, I think, great, I've won a queen, but I'm going to lose it right away. And in the end, he's going to take it with check, which will give him time to take the bishop, and he'll have an extra knight. And you can see that the evaluation bar is completely black here. So I would have fallen for this trap, but I knew about it, this trap, so it didn't work. That's why I play the pawn to e3. Now he plays c6 because the capture on d5 could really have been possible. I put my bishop on d3, he puts his bishop on e7. The queen to c2, he does kingside castling, knight ge2. He plays h6, I pull back my bishop to h4, he puts the rook on e8. That's why the computer says there's 100% accuracy in the opening, because here he's playing all the best moves. There's no problem, these are very good moves, me too, kingside castling. And now he plays knight h5. I was surprised by this move, but actually it's the best move. According to the chess.com computer, this move, knight h5, and it's true that I hadn't anticipated this move, which forces the exchange of the bishops on the dark square. So I took, he takes back, and then I decided to play rook a b1 to launch the minority attack. It's also a good choice depending on the computer. He plays the knight on f8, then I send the pawn to b4, and then he makes his move, queen h4. And that the computer slightly lowers its rating. There, he says that it's not a very good move. I had a feeling about it during the game. I told you about it. That's primal aggression. He brings his queen here, but I don't really see what comes next. So yes, he wants to play knight to f6, then knight to g4 to attack h2. Yes, he has the bishop that can sometimes help the rook and sometimes the returning knight. So really, when I say that, you end up thinking actually all the pieces are coming in. But it's not easy to coordinate all these pieces quickly, knowing that white also have defensive moves. There are the three protective pawns. The knight can also intervene if needed, so we can push back this attack. And so I play b5. I'm creating the minority attack on the other wing. He plays bishop to d7, capture on c6, capture on c6. And here I go into b7. I hesitated for a long time. With k4, the computer slightly prefers k4, but it says the second best move is rook b7. So I played this move. He comes to contest the file with rook b8, so I play rook b1, there's the exchange, rook takes, And now he brings his knight back to f6. And that's when I started to think, because I was telling myself still, the knight is going to come to g4 with threats to h2 and also to f2. The white square bishop, which can also sometimes get involved. So I decided to attack his queen with g3. And here I had calculated that on queen h3, so he came to g4, but I had calculated this line. Queen h3, knight f4. Queen g4, h3. I told myself if he comes to f3, bishop e2, he loses his queen, but he could come to g5. And there, what bothered me on h4 was the move to g4, and on bishop e2, it was the return to f5. And if I play bishop d3, it repeats the moves. That's why I told myself before playing h4, I would have to take the bishop. And if he recaptures with the knight on f8, now I win his queen. h4. Queen g4, bishop e2, because he no longer has queen f5, the bishop is no longer there, I could take it and the queen has no square. But the problem with my idea of rook takes bishop is that he can recapture with that knight and give the queen an escape square. And I would have lost the exchange without sufficient reason. So anyway, my opponent didn't go to h3, he immediately went to g4. So I played knight to f4, thinking it could already be interesting to have the knight on that square. I know it can be chased away by the g5 push. But honestly, that didn't worry me because h3 could push back his queen and then the queen no longer has the g5 square. So if she comes to f3, bishop e2 and wins immediately, so he can't play me. g5, that's why he played. Queen g5. And there, I returned to my idea of playing queenside with knight a4 to then enter c5 and attack the bishop. The computer still preferred to push it to h4 immediately. But he's doing knight h5 and that's it. His mistake, he loses a piece. Because the one defending the knight is the queen. So I play h4, the move I had been looking at for a little while. And suddenly his queen can no longer defend the knight unless she comes to g4. But on g4, bishop e2. And in the end, I'm going to take his knight. That's why he immediately went to e7. I took his knight, and the end of the game isn't very interesting because now, obviously, with an extra piece, it's pretty easy to win. I hope this video was interesting and informative about this opening. We saw the elephant trap, we saw the Carlsbad structure, we saw how to absorb an attack on the king side, repousser l'adversaire. Ce sont quand même des thèmes intéressants. Vous pouvez mettre des pouces, commenter la vidéo, partager, soutenir la chaîne. Et on se retrouvera bientôt pour de nouvelles aventures. Au revoir à tous.